Well, so today we will begin Dryden's of dramatic poesy. John Dryden was one of the singular poets of the 17th century who was as famous as a critic as he was as a poet. And this, you will understand, was a new phenomenon because earlier in the 16th century, most of the 17th century, we have not seen many poets who were also great critics or dramatists who also wrote on the theory of drama. So if we look at the Elizabethan or Jacobean age, we do not find any of the famous dramatists apart from Ben Jonson. We do not find others writing on critical theories, and those who wrote on theories, they were not great dramatists. And even if we look at Dryden's contemporary Milton, who wrote a great number of prose treatises, but those treatises were mostly on political and social issues and not on literary theory. He contributed very little to theory, apart from, say, I can remember the preface to Samson Agonistes or some other writings, but we cannot say that he is a major contributor to literary criticism, even though he was such a great writer both in poetry and prose. Therefore, the rise of the literary critic, who is also a great poet, that we may say in England, it is more or less an 18th century event. Now, I will have to tell you a few things beforehand to understand Dryden in his context. The first thing is that I already told you that he was a contemporary of Milton. Even though he was younger than Milton, but more or less they were contemporaries. So if we look at their dates, Milton's dates are 1608 to 1674. 1608 Milton was born, and 1674 he died. And his great work Paradise Lost was published in 1667 in 10 books, and in 1674 in 12 books. And the dates of John Dryden. Dryden was born in 1631. That is, you can see that is about 20 years or more after Milton, and died in 1700. So the date 1700 is the first year of the 18th century. Even though he lived throughout his life in the 17th, he is more or less known to us as a writer of the 18th century. Because we study the 18th century in England as the age of prose and reason, and Dryden along with Pope contributed in a major way to the development of prose and reason in the 18th century. On the other hand, Milton, even though he lived in the 17th century, he looks back to the 16th, because he is also called the last humanist. So he is a humanist poet in the middle of a society that was already looking forward to the Restoration. You all know that the Restoration was in 1660. So Milton lived another 14 years after the Restoration. Very unhappily, he was blind, he was out of time, we may say, and even though he produced his greatest work, Paradise Lost, in this period. So he looked back to the 16th century for his inspiration, whereas Dryden looks forward to the 18th century. And Dryden is more of a restoration kind of writer than Milton. And we all know the great differences in the style in prose writing between Dryden and Milton. So Milton's prose is very Latinate or sometimes with Greek and Hebrew syntax, very scholarly, periodic prose like in Ciceronian prose. So we may say from the modern point of view, an outdated prose. And T.S. Eliot thought that Milton harmed the English language by writing this kind of prose. Dryden, on the other hand, writes very lucid, clear prose, which almost reads like modern prose. So you may imagine that in Dryden's time there was this raging controversy over prose style, mainly waged by the Royal Society and people like Thomas Pratt, who were of the opinion that prose should be very clear, matter of fact, and should be a language that can also serve sciences, experimental sciences, modern sciences. Therefore, the old humanist kind of prose, that was not desired anymore. And in Eliot we find a bias against Milton's prose, but that is another discussion. So if we think of three poets who were also great writers of criticism, we read their critical writings with relish, then I suppose that we would speak of Dryden, Arnold and Eliot in English writing. All these three were great poets as well as critics, and they influenced their ages, respective ages, through their critical writings. Now, I say that the phenomenon of a poet critic or a poet who is also a theorist rises in the 18th century with Dryden. But I should say that probably this was the impact of writers like Corneille. You all know that the 18th century period in England, this period was highly influenced by the French neoclassical movements of the 17th century. So Pope and Dryden, they were mostly imitating French writers, French dramatists, Racine, Corneille, Molière, and so on. And this imitation of French writings would continue in the Restoration period. So among these French writers, Corneille was a dramatist as well as a writer on dramatic theory. Therefore, undoubtedly, Dryden was highly influenced by Corneille when he decided to write theoretical writings. Dryden was made the poet laureate in 1668. Now you see, ironically, Paradise Lost was first published in 1667, and Milton would live for a number of years after this. He dies in 1674. So, in spite of such a great poet living, Dryden is made the poet laureate. So, the reason is very clear. Milton was an anti-royalist. He was a Republican and was against the Restoration. We know that he was arrested, after the Restoration, and Marvell exercised his influence to get Milton free from jail. So because of political reasons, Milton won't be made the poet laureate, but there would not be any other poet, living poet greater than him at that moment. And however, so because of these reasons, Dryden was made the poet laureate in 1668. So I am not suggesting that Dryden was a lesser poet or a greater poet, nothing of that sort. I am not comparing, because these two poets, they write different kinds of things. Dryden often tried to imitate Shakespeare, or even write in the manner of Shakespeare sometimes. For example, his play, his tragedy, All for Love, was an imitation of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And he also used blank verse in that play. So blank verse, Shakespeare used in his plays sometimes, and Milton was of course the master of blank verse. The whole of Paradise Lost was written in blank verse. So Dryden tried to emulate or imitate the great qualities of his predecessors. But he wrote a very different kind of drama, because the whole temperament of these times were different, and the Restoration was altogether a different, time. You know that the King Charles mostly lived in Paris during his exile in the Commonwealth period, and his wife was French. So when he was restored to the throne in England, he came with a lot of French friends, a French wife, and obviously the court was highly influenced by French customs, practices, and literature as well. So the court literature would be influenced by French practices. So Dryden oriented himself for such a kind of atmosphere. Otherwise, he won't be made the poet laureate, because the poet laureate is the poet employed by the court. I am looking at the introduction in Bolton's edition. This essay of dramatic poesy was published in 1668, the same year that Dryden was made the poet laureate. The title of the essay, Dryden of Dramatic Poesy, an essay with Sir Robert Howard's preface to the great favourite and Dryden's defence of an essay. Now, the defence of an essay was another essay published by Dryden later, in which he concluded his argument with Howard, his brother-in-law, on the question whether verse should be employed in drama or not. Now, so when we read this essay, you will often be reminded of Sidney's An Apology, because like Sidney's Apology, this essay is also a kind of a defense, as it proclaims in the title. Not this essay, I mean the later essay, defense of an essay. So here also there is a kind of defense, there is a kind of argumentation, because Dryden would be speaking in favor of some practices with regard to using of rhyme and so on. Dryden's aim was to stimulate thought about issues which were practical as well as theoretical. So it is said by Bolton in here that this is an example of practical criticism. The phrase practical criticism was made popular in the 20th century by I.A. Richards. So practical criticism means examination of literary works like critical reviews, and Dryden examines Ben Jonson's play. So the whole theory that he lays down in this essay, that is oriented towards practical criticism of plays or poetry. Therefore, obviously, Dryden is compared to T.S. Eliot, who wrote an essay called Poetry and Drama. Because in this essay, Dryden speaks on many Elizabethan and Jacobean playwrights. The essay was composed between 1665, June of 1665 and December of 1666. That is more than a year, when Dryden was out of London because of the plague. So he was at Charlton Park, near Malmesbury, the home of his father-in-law, the Earl of Berkshire, where he was spending a time of leisure, one may say, so like an aristocrat, and he amused himself with this writing. So he poses as the aristocratic writer who easily writes anything without much labor. This was, of course, a kind of idea that continued in the English Renaissance, that was borrowed from the Italian idea of sprezzatura. I am writing in the chat box. Sprezzatura in Italian, it means the ease of speaking or the ease of writing that an aristocratic courtier is supposed to have. So this was also imitated by the English people. He had collaborated with Sir Robert Howard on the play The Indian Queen, and in writing another play, The Rival Ladies. Now, Samuel Pepys had written on The Indian Queen, the play good but spoiled with the rhyme which breaks the sense, which triggered all this dispute or controversy over whether rhyme should be used in a play or not. And Thomas Sprat published a book, Observations on Monsieur de Sorbier's Voyage into England, in 1665, in which he attacked on the neglect of rhyme and the unities in English drama. So I am writing in the chat. Thomas Sprat wrote this work, Observations. So this is a book by Sprat, Observations on Monsieur de Sorbier's Voyage into England, where Sprat was criticizing, or Sprat was responding to Sorbier, the French writer, Sorbier's attack on neglect of rhyme and unities in English drama. So you have to remember that this was the neoclassical period par excellence in France, or a little later. And in England, plays were not always, they did not always conform to the neoclassical canon, as we know, because the great tradition of Elizabethan and Jacobean dramatists, they developed the indigenous kind of drama, and the taste of the English audience was very different. So all the neoclassical rules were flouted very easily by Shakespeare and other Jacobean dramatists. And this kind of continued, and when after the French influence, when in the Augustan period writers started imitating the neoclassical style of France, even then their performance was far from desirable from the French point of view. So rhyme was neglected, and the three unities were not maintained, and these were attacked by Sorbier, to which Spratt was responding. Except for his preference for blank verse over rhyme, Spratt's claims for the superiority of English drama would find Dryden a sympathetic reader. So Spratt defended English drama, said that it was better than French drama of the period. However, he preferred blank verse, and therefore he could not properly respond to the critique by Sorbier that rhyme is not used or rhyme is neglected in English drama. So the use of rhyme, as we can see, was a bone of contention, and it was a kind of international controversy or international debate, and Dryden found himself willy-nilly participating in this debate. And in this essay he most ambitiously constructed this critical treatise, undoubtedly written partly in response to this stimulus. He was committed to maintaining a critical position against an adversary. The matter was further complicated by the entry of his brother-in-law, Sir Robert Howard, into the literary world. So Dryden's brother-in-law Robert Howard was also a writer of plays, and he also, as we can see, collaborated with Dryden in the play The Indian Queen. But later we see that the two of them did not see eye to eye, and Dryden was kind of forced to dispute with his brother-in-law in these treatises. So Howard came out against Dryden on the matter of rhyming plays. He censored classical and French drama in some respects, but also condemned tragicomedy. This is again, you can see, very eccentric, because Howard censored neoclassical and French drama, but also criticized tragicomedy. Neoclassical critics criticized tragicomedy. As we saw, Sidney criticized it in An Apology. But a person who is a critic of neoclassicism, when he criticizes tragicomedy, then it is a kind of eccentric point of view in Howard. In the essay, therefore, Dryden provided some supporting fire for Spratt's reply to Sorbier, as well as an assault on the position occupied by Howard. So Dryden was forced to write against Howard because Howard had directly criticized him, challenged him in the preface to 4 new plays in 1665. The essay, published late in 1667 or early 1668, was not the end of the dispute with Howard. In his clumsy way, he tried to counter Dryden's arguments by his preface to The Great Favourite or The Duke of Lerma in 1668. Now this edition by Bolton, such beautiful editions you will not find in the market today. It is a hardbound, it is my mother's copy, okay, so I treasure it. So this edition contains all the relevant critical writings relevant for Dryden's essay. So you can see the preface to The Great Favourite is also included here as Dryden's later writing defense of an essay. I do not know whether you can see it or not. Okay. I can show you the frontispiece or the title page of the preface. The Great Favourite or The Duke of Lerma by Robert Howard. You can see the title page. So in the preface to this play, Robert Howard again criticized Dryden, or responded to Dryden's criticism. Now obviously Howard could not write in such a beautiful language or beautiful prose as Dryden, nor did he have the lucid argumentation, which was a very strong point in Dryden's writing. So then Dryden managed the last word in public at any rate in his defense of an essay which he published in the same year. So this was published as a preface to the second edition of his Indian Emperor, his play, Indian Emperor. So here is the defense of an essay. So those who were interested in further reading, the development of Dryden's argument in Of Dramatic Poesy may read this essay. But I am not serious about it. I do not seriously suggest that you read it. Okay. Dryden, recognizing that the new social ethos demanded a corresponding literary development, was concerned to examine the achievements of the past in Europe as well as in England in order to determine what lessons could be learned for his own time. To this extent, Dryden honestly described the essay as for the most part borrowed from the observations of others. So this essay Of Dramatic Poesy, Dryden said, was mostly borrowed from the observation of others. Now, as you know that any great writer borrows from others. Sidney's Apology, you have seen how much Sidney borrowed from the Italian neoclassical critics and also the ancients, Aristotle, Horace and so on. But while traditional and borrowed ideas are embedded in the essay, they do not add up to the sum of its achievement. Dryden speakers assume with Aristotle that the object of art is the imitation of nature. What they argue about is the means by which this imitation is best secured in the Restoration period. This is made clear in the defense, where Dryden accuses Howard of mistaking means for ends. So, how can a writer imitate nature in the best way possible? That would be appropriate for the Restoration period. That is the query or investigation in this essay. Dryden imagines a few characters, aristocratic people, friends, who are having a conversation on poetry and so on. And through these characters he represents his contemporaries, of course, as he does in Absalom and Ahithophel, this poem. And the characters also represent different points of view. So this kind of writing a dialogue where different characters represent different points of view was as old as Plato's writings. Dialogue was a major form of writing in the Renaissance. The Italian critics, French critics, they have all written major dialogues, and they all kind of imitated, Plato's dialogues. However, even though it is a conversation, but it is written in the essay form. So, you all know that the essay form was already a very modern form, because among ancient writings we do not find essays, strictly speaking, apart from Seneca's short prose pieces. We do not find anything which can be called an essay. The essay, we conventionally believe that it began with Montaigne, the French writer, who called his writings essays, and then Francis Bacon and others, they wrote essays, and the essay form developed. But the essay form became a major modern form because it was very convenient to carry forward any argumentation in this fall. So we have the characters here: Eugenius, Crates, Lycidaeus, and Neander, and they represent different people. Dryden himself is Neander, and we'll see the other characters. In the main exchange, Eugenius replies to Crates' case for the justness of imitation achieved by the ancient writers. He does not try very rigorously to refuse the claim. Rather, he stresses the failure of the ancients and the success of the moderns in securing delight and liveness of response. So Eugenius stands for the modern point of view. Now you see here this notion or allusion, we may say, to a far grander debate between the ancients and moderns. The ancient point of view, the ancient theories, ancient practices, and the modern point of view. This debate actually became very lively in France in the 19th century later, but I suppose from the 17th century onwards, because in 17th century France was neoclassical par excellence, as I told you already. So the modern point of view did not so much vigorously raise its voice, but in France. But in other places, like in England, we see that the modern point of view is also upheld. Here, for example, by Dryden, to the character of Eugenius. Modern writers are not content with a dull imitation of their predecessors, they draw from the life. So the idea of imitation is as old as Plato and Aristotle. So every writer of poetic theory writes on imitations, and you already know about Philip Sidney's discussion of imitation in an apology. So imitation in the Renaissance actually often meant imitation of earlier authors. In the Renaissance, the two ideas of imitation were simultaneously present. One was imitation of an ancient author, which was the traditional idea which we find in the Ciceronian movement. Every writer tried to imitate Cicero's prose style. And the other imitation was imitation of life in literature. So these two ideas of imitation. Now, the imitation of life in literature, this idea was not modern at all. It was derived from Aristotle. So Aristotle's theory of mimesis, the reflectionist theory. And the imitation of ancient authors, that was a very popular theory in the Renaissance, because at that time the notion of originality was not there. Every writer was supposed to imitate another great writer. Similarly, when Neander, in his vindication of national honor, replies to Lycidaeus, the champion of French drama, he admits that the French are superior in contriving regular plots, but asserts that this is not necessarily the best means of achieving liveliness. Neander replies to Lycidaeus. Lycidaeus is the Francophile, that is one who is in support of French literature or one who loves French. So against the Francophile Lycidaeus, Neander objects that the French truly create very successful plots, but they are not as lively as in English drama, which suggests that French drama was more artificial, English drama was more spontaneous. Liveliness Those beauties of the French poesy are indeed the beauties of a statue, but not of a man. So a statue would be appreciated as a great classical work of art. Much of imitation of the Greeks started by imitating the sculptures and the architecture which were kind of rediscovered in Rome in the 16th century or 15th century. Okay, so a statue is a great work of art, but it is not lively. That was Neander's argument or Dryden's argument. English writers can achieve it in regularly formed drama, as Johnson demonstrates particularly in The Silent Woman. So Dryden reviews Johnson's play The Silent Woman and says that it is much more lively, as we can see. So for the generation of Dryden, Shakespeare, Johnson, these were great models of English drama or English writing. Johnson, he insists, not only observes the unities but also creates numerous vital characters, achieves inevitability in the working out of his plot, and exploits the dramatic value of suspense. So Dryden can happily praise Johnson vis-a-vis the French writers, because Johnson was a neoclassical writer himself and observed the three unities in his plays and so on. But you can see that here Dryden cannot mention or name Shakespeare or the romantic kind of writers, because they did not write neoclassical drama. So in this debate and this championing of English drama against French drama, Dryden's model is not Shakespeare but Johnson. Okay. So in this essay, this essay is written in the backdrop of a naval war between the English and the Dutch. The Dutch fleet had entered into the Thames, and the English fought with them, and the friends who had assembled on a barge, they were having a party on a barge. They were having a conversation. They heard the noises of war. In this war, the English became victorious. But even though it is the war, it is a war between the English and the Dutch, but actually the context of this play is the war between England and France, and the rivalry in all spheres between the English and the French. So the war is used by Dryden symbolically. So just as a war is going on, here in the realm of literature also, there is a controversy, there is a debate, which is a kind of war. Eugenius is the advocate for the moderns. So let me write down the name. Eugenius stands for the moderns. Lycidaeus is the Francophile, I have already said. And these characters, invented characters, they also stood for actual people, his contemporaries. So Eugenius is identified with Charles Sackville. Charles Sackville, Lord Buckhurst, to whom this essay is dedicated. Okay, so Sackville or Lord Buckhurst, he is Eugenius, and Lycidaeus was Sir Charles Sedley. Lycidaeus, Charles Sedley, who was the Francophile, as you remember, and Neander was Dryden, Critus was modeled on Howard. So Crates is the pompous, arrogant character modeled on his brother-in-law Robert Howard, of course. Neander was Dryden, I have told you. Crates was, though considered pompous, was well known as a playwright and entrepreneur in the theatrical world. So the fact that Dryden writes against him, or he is criticized as a pompous, arrogant man, does not mean that he was not a good poet. He was a good poet, writer, dramatist, and theatrical entrepreneur. By this time, Neander or Dryden was the author of 2 plays and part author of a 3rd. Okay, so the characters in this conversation, they represent individuals as well as representative of certain points of view. I have already said that. Now, set against the battle in which the English fleet gained a notable victory over the Dutch, the essay drew its strongest persuasive power from the appeal to national pride. So national pride is important here, and the national pride is represented by Neander or Dryden himself. So the principal enemy here is the French nation, as I already told you. So you can see this love and hate relationship between the English and the French. The English writers and poets, they could not neglect the great influence of the French poets and dramatists of the neoclassical period. At the same time, they also would take up the position of patriots or nationalists in any controversy. They would defend the English as opposed to the French. So this is very interesting. And the obvious context is the Restoration. This essay, as you remember, was published in 1668. That is just 8 years after the Restoration. The year 1660 had seen the restoration of our happiness. Quotation. Poetry was lifting up its head and already shaking off the rubbish which lay so heavy on it. The 20 years of the Commonwealth given over to a barbarous race of men, enemies of all good learning. So who are these barbarous race of men? The Puritans, who ruled England for 20 years during the Commonwealth. And now under Charles, under the Restoration, poetry is once again breathing free, to suggest that the writings of the Puritans were dull, and real lively poetry and drama could prosper only in the Restoration. The tone, characters and setting are designed to appeal forcibly to the cultivated Restoration reader. Cultivated. This kind of adjective would always be used with reference to any court culture, because courtly culture was always very artificial, cultivated, fashionable, and so on. Neander remarks that post-Shakespearean dramatists are like heirs to an estate which is ruined before they inherit it. So the post-Shakespearean dramatists, they find themselves in a quandary, in a problem, because the literary estate has already been ruined before they could inherit it. Why? Because the innumerable writers who imitated Shakespeare and other great Elizabethan and Jacobean dramatists, they mostly failed. So the generation of Dryden, their immediate predecessors were mostly failed writers and uninspiring writing, which did not help them in the least. At every turn, the imagery reminds us that the drama is an integral part of human society, as much a part of life as physical behavior or economic realities. So this is again a phenomenon of the 18th century. The emergence of the public sphere. So you all know that the newspaper, journals, coffee houses, public spaces, salons, public societies, clubs, all these developed in the 18th century. Thus, a public sphere developed in this period. And for the first time, we had like celebrities, public figures, great poets and authors who would be debating literary issues in the coffee houses and so on, and their views would be published in the journals or newspapers and so on. Therefore, in such a society, theatre was an integral part. It was a part of public life, as important as economic and social realities. That sense one finds in reading this essay. The essay constantly refers to contemporary writers and examines one play by Ben Jonson, The Silent Woman. So it is an example of practical criticism. Well, I have been talking for a long time and only 3 minutes are left. So if you have any questions, you can ask. Such an age was Dryden's, which after the Elizabethan Jacobean period of creative activity followed in his eyes by the artistic sterility of the Commonwealth. They required a stock-taking rather than fresh and fundamental theorizing. So you see that Dryden here is performing this role of stock-taking. That is, where does English poetry and English drama stand after the Commonwealth period? The Elizabethan and Jacobean period were great periods of creativity. Then the Commonwealth period is looked upon as a period of dullness or a period of flagging inspiration. So where do the English people stand after the Restoration? And this needed more of a stock-taking rather than producing some new theory. And therefore this essay looks back historically at English literature, at the same time examines the development of poetic drama or dramatic poetry in England. That is again something very interesting. Dryden uses the term dramatic poesy and T.S. Eliot uses the term poetic drama, and Shakespeare does not use any term at all. So okay, I think we should stop here.